I also do guys, I know that. I just like this a lot. Yeah, I know. It's going through that. I'm scrolling down the read and then I go again. I kind of know what it
I think everyone knows.
Okay, let's get started. Please put away all your electronic stuff. Have you guys seen the video? It's still on YouTube, I think. I think there's a few videos. And it's a professor, like in a lecture hall. And there's a student who has their phone, and he gets really angry that the student has the phone, and he keeps asking him to turn it off or to turn it off. So he gets really angry, and he goes and he takes the phone from the student and chucks it against the wall and breaks it. I'll bring that one in on Thursday. Not to scare you, I'm not going to do that, but I just think it's kind of a little bit of, a little bit of comic relief, because it's an issue, but it's kind of like that is not what's going to happen. But it's kind of funny because it's so outlandish. But anyway, so please put away, on that note, please put away your phones and everything. I promise that you can use them after class. Promise. You don't have to be here, stay here for too long. Okay, so how are you guys doing? Yeah? Did you have a good weekend? We don't have school next Monday. There's something to maybe look forward to. Okay. So just keep in mind that we have our tests, our assignment on Friday. So it's due the 18th. I know that we have last week just kind of get into some of the concepts, and then this week finish up concepts from chapter 1, and then the homework will be, of course, over chapter 1. All right, so that'll be due Friday the 18th at 11:59, and that's all on the calendar, on the syllabus, and in MindTap. Okay, everyone's good with MindTap. Okay. One thing that I want to bring up though is that how many of you are doing the grace period? Anyone waiting? Okay, there should be several of you that are. And so let me just make a blanket statement. MindTap reminds you, right? It'll tell you every time you're on how many days you have left. If you don't pay by that day, well, first of all, you won't have access to MindTap. But even worse, it is a real struggle with Cengage tech support, with Blackboard, with everything to get your MindTap back. I don't know why. There's something that happens on the financial end in Cengage, and it sort of like reaches this limit, and if you don't pay, then it's like, okay, you're not going to pay, and it's black and white, and that's it. So then having to redo it and get your information again has been somewhat of a nightmare for some students. And so they fall behind, and then they have to catch up, and then, as we talked about, if you are behind, then you're going to be kind of running uphill the rest of the semester to try and catch up. So just a word of advice, if you are doing the grace period, please make sure you pay before. Okay. Okay, so I want to just just talk about a little review since it's been 5 days. So let's see. All right, so we talked about populations and samples, right? And so we also talked about, well, actually, can somebody tell me what a population, like, together? What can you tell me? Can you give me a sentence, definition, a couple words about populations and samples? What are they? How are they related, etc.? Yes?
So a population would be a group of individuals that were interested in studying.
Yes.
And then a sample would be a subset from that group of individuals.
Great. Okay. So whoever we're interested in studying, okay, a group of individuals, that's a population. But we can't test, measure, we can't apply treatment to in some way, right? We can't do those things to a population that is unknown, that we have a question about. It could be, 10,000 people. We don't know. So we take a sample, and the sample is like the means to an end, right? So we got this means to an end, then we test that group. We measure on some variable that group, okay? Then we say, okay, here's this group, and this is what they got on their test, this is what they did, how they did on their survey, and so that's how the whole population would do on this survey. Okay, so the relationship between population and samples is what statistics is really based on, and so we're going to revisit that that relationship a lot in a very many different ways on different levels. But knowing the difference there is really important for stats. So good, thank you. Now we also have other differences that are a little more practical. So when we talk about a population, we are talking about a certain set of values. Okay. So what is the name of any value that's associated with a population? And you can just say it if you know it. Yes. And what are examples of parameters? Like what value is something common that we would use when we're measuring or when we're summarizing or talking about statistics?
Average.
Average, yeah. And that should actually come to mind right away, okay, is our average. So I'm going to say mean. Okay. Now, our mean in population is going to look like this. It's a Greek letter mu. Okay. What other parameters? What other parameters are there?
Standard deviation.
Okay. So we're going to get to the point where I'm just going to give you like a mu, and you need to know that you're going to calculate it for a population. And standard deviation is the same. But even the calculations for these are different, okay? What I mean is, I'm ahead of myself here. So sample, we call that the values associated with the sample, what? Yeah, statistic. Okay, and so we have our mean, which is a capital letter M, and our standard deviation, which is a lowercase s. Okay. So if I ask you to calculate this, you should know that that's a standard deviation per sample. There is a different formula for population standard deviation. Okay, so these are just, I just want to, start informing you that there's going to be symbols, some Greek, some not, that are associated with all these values, and you're going to need to know and determine which values go, what they are, and then what values go with samples and what values go with populations. Okay. And one more thing I wanted to bring up too is that we're going to use the letter N a lot. Does anyone know what N means in statistics?
The number of subjects.
Yes, the number of subjects or the number of scores. So if we're looking at a population, okay, I'm going to call it our sample size equals capital letter N. Okay, so the number of people in our sample, number of scores in our sample, assuming that every person is going to produce a score. Actually, I should have put sample size there. Number of scores in the population. And then for number of scores in sample is a lowercase n. Okay, and we call it sample size. That's why I erased it. Sample size because we're using the sample as a means to an end. So we're almost always going to be talking about sample size. Now we are going to be referring to capital letter N to number of scores in the population. But we don't usually say sample size, or no, technically this isn't a sample size because it's not a sample, but if we happen to know how many people are, how many scores are in a population, then we're gonna have an N, right, a capital letter N. Okay, so just some of these things that are really important to distinguish, okay? Okay, so going with populations and samples. All right, so on Thursday, we talked about a little analogy. Okay, so I like to use the apple analogy, okay, with the whole apple being the population and then the bite being the sample, hoping that the bite you take out of the apple is going to reflect and be the same as what you expect the apple to be. Okay, so you're gonna take a bite and hope that the apple tastes like the apple. Okay, just like you're gonna take a sample of a big group of people and hope that that sample is gonna be like the rest of the people. Okay, so that's my analogy. And so, does anyone have any questions about that analogy? Okay. So what I'd like you to do is actually what I'd like you to do is work with your study buddy or study buddies who you met last week. If you weren't here or you did make a study buddy, just say hi and kind of, and if you want to, you can work alone, but I'd like you to at least meet or interact with somebody in the class, okay? Just to have that ally in the class, okay? For the very least. But what I'd like you to do is come up with your own analogy for sample and population, okay? So much like the apple, okay, I'd like you to think of some other object or something, some other situation that would work as a sample and population relationship. Now, no one can do food because that's been taken. Okay, so think about something original that you could use that would make sense. Okay, does that sound reasonable? Okay. All right. So go ahead and together. Yeah, just go ahead and I'll give you about 5
Thank you.